Hi everyone, it's me, Crafty Witch, and welcome back to my channel. So I decided to make another video. I'm getting ready for bed. You probably see Kiva, she's like somewhere over here. I thought I would just share some stories about the farm and my grandparents and my mom, and if that's all boring to you, you can click off now. No big deal, right? So, and yeah, so anyway, now there were two pieces of land. One was leased and the other one was owned, and one was leased by my grandparents and the other one was owned by my grandparents. My Kokum, my grandmother, Kokum is Cree for grandmother, and Cree is the Native American or Native Canadian tribe. Anyway, during World War II, she bought her own farm, and it was in her name until the day she died. And I talked a little bit about her in other videos and things like that. So that was one piece of land. And then there's this other piece of land that had an old country school. It was a big old white school. And it was technically a one-room school. It was massive, like it was really big. And, but it had a sliding wall on the inside of the school. And like the one wall that faced east was like just all glass windows. It was massive. It was incredible. And then to divide that one giant room into two, they had a wall that would pivot, and so you can either move that wall, like swing it open and have it go flush against like one of the, like where all the windows are, so you could literally like form two classrooms, and there was like a door on the one side and you can walk through, or you could like have it where it's divided into two, or you could swing it open or whatever. So that was the school. And then on that piece of land was what we call the schoolhouse, which was the house where the teacher would live. Now the original part of that house was essentially just two rooms. In my old videos you saw part of it. I think in the one where it's the Nordic Book of Shadows that I like made for my son Dalton, probably back in 2008, 2009, somewhere, no, probably 2008. It's a pink bedroom. So that bedroom and then the living room were the original parts of that house, and that was like 100 years old, those two rooms. And then in the 1940s, they added on a kitchen, what we call the blue bedroom, some stairs that took you upstairs to two other rooms, and this house had 3 attics. It was like the coolest thing. So as you were going up the stairs, there were 2 attics on either side, and they actually form kind of like a horseshoe, so you can crawl in. And this was like so much fun as a kid. You can crawl into the attic on this side and like crawl around, and you can come out the attic on this side. It was so cool. It was also very creepy because it was fun but also creepy. Those attics were also like, when every time you wanted to walk by them, they kind of gave off this weird vibe. There were spirits that kind of settled in there. And then when you got up to the top of the stairs, there was like kind of like an open bedroom, and then there was another bedroom off to this side, and then directly in front of you was a little tiny door, and that was the 3rd attic. So that was what we call the schoolhouse, but then we would call them both, like both pieces of land, the farm. And they're like, oh, you're down at the farm, and they'd be like, yeah, I was at the schoolhouse or whatever. That's, you know, or we'll just say moms or that kind of thing. So on the piece of land that was owned by my grandparents or my grandmother, there was this hill, and we called it the Cherry Hill. And We were always told as kids to never go play over there, to leave it alone. And when we were really young, we weren't told why until we got a little bit older. And we always respected that. We never went over there or anything like that. But the reason why is there is some really ancient graves there. And my grandparents always said, like, to have that respect and to leave that area alone and to pay your respects and that kind of thing. Don't go and, you know, play hide and seek over there or do anything stupid. But not everybody listened to that piece of advice from my grandparents. So I guess it was back in I don't know, the 70s. I would have been just a little shit. Like, I would have been like, I don't know, 3, 4, or whatever at the time. And I was the youngest in my generation. So by the time I was born, my first cousins were all like teenagers or in their 20s. Like, they were all older than me. And so some of them were kind of rowdy and crazy folks and like to go and party and that kind of thing. And they're teenagers. It was the 70s. And some of their friends were crazy and rowdy and that kind of thing. And so they would go up to the Cherry Hill, and you know how teenagers like to try to, you know, go through like old haunted houses and things like that. So they would go and try to bother with what was out there. And the one guy had left, and everybody else had stayed at there was like three little houses on that piece of land. So one my Uncle Ivan lived in, the other one my Aunt Lorena lived in, and then the other one my grandparents lived in. So they all kind of had their own little tiny, and these are like tiny houses. Like my uncle's was like a 2-room house, and same with my aunt. And then my grandparents had a 3, 4-room house kind of thing. It was very small, very humble little dwellings. And so this one guy, I guess they were drinking or whatever, and he took off and went outside, and they thought, well, maybe he just went to the bathroom or whatever, or maybe he decided to go home. And then he went to the Cherry Hill, was walking around out there, didn't see anything, laid down on the ground, and I guess fell asleep. When he woke up, they looked like monks. They had like the robes and the hoods. They had the sash, the belt that went around the waist and hung down. And I don't know if it was like brown or black cloth, but it was dark, like, so I don't think he could even tell. But they formed a circle around him, and they were some kind of spirit of some sort, but they had like really long fingers that were very sharp, and they were clawing at him and like attacking him. They were like clawing. He had a jean jacket on and a shirt and everything, and he was fighting and screaming, but nobody heard him. And then he got up, and they chased him away from that hill, the Cherry Hill. And he goes running back to the cabin, and when he went inside, like, he was like freaked right out. He was just super pale, and he was panting. He had sobered up quite fast, and his jean jacket was slashed all the way down the back of it. His shirt was torn. His clothes, like wherever those things were clawing at him and scratching at him, had torn right through, and he had scratches on his skin even, and things like that. So when my grandparents heard about that, they gave them all these young guys heck for trying to do stuff like that. So he was the only one in our family that had ever seen those things before. We don't know what those are. He said they looked like they were monks, just because of the way they were dressed. They had like the robes, but they had hoods. He couldn't see their faces, but all he could see were these really pale hands. And they had like the cord that went around the waist, and it would dangle down off to the side. So we don't know what those are. So that was one thing that would happen out there. I'm just checking the time. What else would happen? All kinds of stuff. We would see like the little hairy people out there. I'd done videos years ago about all the different types of little people. Then there was the other kind of little people that they're only about 2.5, 3 feet tall. But they look like normal people, just small, you know, like just little. And they had families that were out there. We would also see P.O.Box out there. And my cousins had talked about when they were little, so this would have been before I was born, they were out playing by the trees, and then they looked over because they could see something moving in the trees, and there was like this like a family that was dressed like an old-fashioned kind of like pioneer clothing, like with the bonnets and the long dresses and whatever it was that they were wearing, like maybe aprons over top or whatever. But I remember my cousin Kim was talking about like how they had like the bonnets and like really like old-fashioned clothing. So I mean, this would have been in the 60s, and they were like moving. I think they had like what did she call it? Like a, oh, in my mind, I can't think of it right now. Like a wagon kind of thing. And like this family was like walking through the bush with like this wagon, and then the one turned and looked right at my cousin and smiled and waved, and then they just faded into the trees. And like, this is on my grandparents' land, and so that scared them. So they saw that. They also saw, my other cousin had seen a P.O.Box sitting on top of my grandparents' roof, and it was eating choke cherries. And it was just sitting there, just staring at the kids as they were eating, like playing, and this thing was eating choke cherries. And it would stack the choke cherry pits, the little tiny seeds that were inside the cherries, stack them in like totally perfect like little pyramids on top of the roof, and like there would be like not a piece of fruit left on those pits. What else did they see out there? We would see black dogs that would disappear, and our neighbors would see black dogs that had red glowing eyes. I saw that once at the schoolhouse. This was already after my mom had passed away, and I saw it chase our neighbors that they kind of are on the shady side of the law, and their van had gone by, and this massive, like massive dog, like it was probably like 6 feet tall. Like it was this massive thing, and it was like running right behind their van, and it was nighttime, and its eyes were like red. And it was winter time, and I was outside trying to shovel, and I took off inside after that. I was like, yeah, that ain't right. That's not right. I'm going inside. There was this other time when my ex-husband and his brother, they were digging a new hole for the outhouse. Oh, I think I'm running out of time. Anyway, there's this little pond or slough that we call it further out in the field. And so they're digging, and it's like around dusk, and they saw this probably this figure that's like 6 to 7 feet tall, and it was running on top of the water, not through it, and it was just this giant dark thing, and it was running on top of the water. It did not make no splashing sounds at all. It wasn't like, and the water was like probably up to your armpits or your waist or something. Like it was, you can take a canoe and go paddle around. Like it wasn't like it was super deep, but it wasn't shallow. And this thing was running on top of the water and didn't make a sound. So that scared them, and they came inside and stuff like that. So yeah, there was that's just some of the stories. There's so many more. There's another one about taking the ace of spades and from a plain deck of cards and then running around the house 4 times. Yeah, I won't even get into that. So anyway, those are just some of the stories. And with winter coming up soon, I just thought I would share some of that. Typically, when it starts getting colder, that's our story time. And that's when we would gather as a family and we would light a candle and, you know, we'd have some snacks out for the kids and for everybody. And then we'd start sharing our ghost stories. And my aunt was the best storyteller ever. She was like the Pied Piper. She was so gentle and so quiet and so sweet. But when she started to talk, like, the kids could be playing in another room or something, but they would just slowly come into the kitchen because we sat around in the kitchen usually, and they would just form like the circle around her. And we didn't have to call them in. They would just hear her, and yet she talked so quietly and so softly and so gentle. But just that energy, they would just come. They were like a moth to a flame, and they would just slowly come and gather, and then we would start sharing our stories. So that was part of our oral tradition. And now that whole generation is gone, now it's me, but I don't have any grandkids yet, so it's just me and my boys. And every once in a while we'll sit around and start reminiscing about some of the old stories that the old people used to share. And yeah, it brings back a lot of memories, and things like that are important, those traditions. And if you have them, keep them going. Even if it feels like, what's the point, or nobody's going to listen or pay attention or anything like that, they're so important. And if you don't have those kind of traditions, it's okay to start them too. So that's it for now. I'm like way over the limit here, so have a good night, everybody. Ciao.